Hello, I am Professor Eric Martin, and I cannot imagine that you're watching this video for any reason other than you are in my History 101 course. And today what I want to do is I want to sum up what we have done so far over the course of the last 3 weeks at the conceptual level. And then I want to clarify some of the conceptual issues in the assigned readings for the coming week in the hopes that this is going to improve the quality of our online discussions. Now, in the first chapter of that Worlds of History book, the very first issue we dealt with was the issue of historical periodization and the use of historical stage theory. So how historians divvy up time into things like the Paleolithic, the Mesolithic, the Neolithic, Bronze Age, Stone Age, that kind of good stuff. And then also this idea of stages of history, the hunter-gatherer stage, the stage of horticulture, the stage of plow agriculture. Now, that's not to say these things are totally false, but it is to say that they are conceptually convenient for historians, for us as historians, for being able to organize the past. So in terms of stage theory, it helps us to characterize an age. The hunter-gatherer, period gives us a sense of characterizing the age. The Industrial Revolution gives us a sense of characterizing the period, right? However, often with these stages, it makes history seem very linear. You go from one event to the next event to the next event. Universal, as if every human society in the world should go through these same stages, and if something's wrong with them, they didn't develop in the proper way. And inevitable in the sense that, we as now, 21st century human beings are the culmination of all history. It's been moving in this direction, and it could not have taken any other path, right? That's a con. But anyway, in that first chapter, we were dealing with these issues of periodization schemes just to kind of make sure we understand what historians do. And specifically with that material, we were looking at how social relations changed during these various periods, the transition from hunter-gatherer human stage to horticulture to plow agriculture, how social relations changed. And particularly an emphasis on how the relations between men and women changed during that period. Then, at the conceptual level, in Chapter 2, we focused on understanding the differences between primary and secondary sources for the purpose of history. And it's very important that you get this down, because we're just going to use that term over and over again, primary, secondary, primary, secondary. Make sure you are able to identify in the chapters which sources are primary sources and which sources are secondary sources. Now, in Chapter 2, the material focused on the kinds of changes that occurred in the world's very first urban centers. We're talking 5,000 people, maybe 10,000. And the idea was in the chapter that you had the secondary source written by Kevin Riley comparing life in ancient Egypt to life in ancient Mesopotamia. And then the chapter was filled with primary sources from, surprise, surprise, ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia. And the idea was that Riley gives us kind of a setup of his interpretation of what life looks like in these places. And then we get the primary sources to try to get clues of our own to what life must have looked like in these places. Now, in Chapter 3, that's what we're doing this week. In Chapter 3, we are going to continue to focus on understanding the relationship between primary and secondary sources. Last time it was just kind of identifying them. This time we're going to work more on complexifying the relationship between them. And Chapter 3 is laid out exactly the way Chapter 2 was. There's one secondary source, this time written by William McNeill, and several primary sources from two different societies, from South Asia, India, and from Greece. So we've got a comparative angle on our history, and just get used to that. That's the way it's going to be. So at issue for this chapter is understanding that there was no right answer to the question, now that our societies have grown even larger, now that we have urbanized even more, now that there are more people, how should we organize them? No single answer to that question. And so this chapter looks at how the ancient Greeks and ancient Indians chose to organize their societies. Two very different ideas. The secondary source describes the South Asian caste system. Make sure you understand what that is by the time you're done reading. And to a lesser degree, the Greek system of territorial sovereignty. Make sure you understand what that is. As you read the McNeill piece, as you read the secondary source, think about the kinds of primary sources McNeill used or might have used, or the kinds he could have used to develop his historical interpretation. Where did it come from? How did he figure these things out? All right. So as you read, mark primary source. Oh, he mentioned something, in particular right here. Mark, I bet he got this from somewhere. Mark, he could have got this from somewhere. Okay, I want you to think about the building blocks he would have used to create this interpretation. And then pick a place to start. Greece or India. You're going to need to read both of them, but it doesn't really matter what order you read them in. And carefully read the primary sources from either Greece or India to begin with. And the intention behind this is you were trying to figure out how McNeill developed his views. Okay, so as you go through the Indian primary sources, or as you go through the Greek primary sources, flip back and forth to the McNeill piece. Oh, I see kind of how this works out now. I understand where this caste system is coming from. Oh, I see reflections of this idea about territorial sovereignty in these sources. Now, in terms of the primary sources, read them slow. Ancient Indian documents are not going to be the easiest read. Ancient Greek documents are not going to be the easiest read. You need to sit down with some time on your hands to be able to go through them slowly and take notes in terms of what do these documents tell you? What is interesting about these documents? Don't get distracted by, well, I didn't understand this world, or this word, or it seemed so confusing. Figure it out. Use that Traditions and Encounters book to provide some context for the material. Look some things up if you need to. But, these primary sources are going to be a bit of a long read. We don't have a lot of reading, so it's fine with me if you have to go through it slowly in order to read between the lines. Now, McNeill has a little less to say about Greece than he does about South Asia. So perhaps the Greek primary sources give you additional ideas about what territorial sovereignty or what social organization itself might have looked like in Greece. So again, the purpose of the chapter is we're doing a comparative exercise between ancient India and ancient Greece, and we're looking at how these two different societies chose to organize themselves as they became more and more urbanized. Greece along the territorial sovereignty, India along the caste system. What does that mean, and how do you see it reflected in the ancient documents? How do historians know this? Now, once you've done that, maybe before you've done that, but once you've done that, I want the main focus of the discussion to be on these documents. But once you've done that, then what do the examples that are used in the Bridging World History video for this week have to add to the discussion in terms of different forms of social organization. You know, we look at that video looks at early Chinese forms of social organization. It looks at Mayan forms of social organization, and it looks at the Igbo Ukwu in Africa forms of social organization. What does that tell us about the right way to organize a society, or why these early urbanizing societies choose to organize themselves the way they do? That is the main issue that we're dealing with this week, is how do societies deal with increasing complexity and increasing more people. And then one of the ways, in terms of your kind of conclusions, closer to the end of the discussion, we're still involved in this. We're living in the biggest cities humans have ever developed. We're living with the most complicated social forms humans have ever developed. What's it mean? What can we learn by looking at the earliest urban centers about contemporary urban social organization? So that's one way to think about it in terms of attempting to apply the ancient history to contemporary issues. Ground this discussion in the primary sources. The mission is to decipher how McNeill read between the lines of primary sources, and give it a shot yourself. Keep that in mind. That's how grades are going to be given out. If you've got questions about the class, email me, call, drop by the office, and enjoy your historical studies.